Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We want to start our job talk today of Dr. Dina Lisnyansky. Dina studied her 3 degrees here at Hebrew University at the Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies Department. She wrote her PhD under the supervision of Professor Mikal Nachman and Professor Meir Khatina. She had a postdoc 1 year at Haifa, I think now in Bar-Ilan,
just
last year, and this summer she spent a month at St. John's College at Oxford. She has a book that will come out. Among her publications there is also one book, Crescents and Croissants, Preaching Islam in France and Italy, and next year will be published Cambridge University Press. But the most impressive and important part of her CV is the fact that she taught at the European Forum for 1 year?
Yes.
For 1 year. So this is, we should also note that. So welcome back here.
Thank you.
And the presentation of today will be European Muslims and migration policy changes in the EU. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, so I'm going to start, and actually I want to start with a quote that is actually new, so we're going to start from almost today. The European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said, "Even if we are now moving away from crisis mode, it is evident that migration will remain a challenge for a generation of Europeans. Europe urgently needs to equip itself with future-proof means of managing migration responsibly and fairly. We have made solid progress in the past 3 years, but now is the time to turn proposals into law and law into practice." What we all can see here is a desperate attempt to make an order in the chaos of migration policy that was not actually a policy up until 2015, up until the refugee crisis. We can see it first of all in the challenges that are defined by the European Commission itself. Insufficient budget, well, all of us have insufficient budgets. Promotion of legal and closure of illegal routes of migration into the EU. And I'm going to speak about these routes in a minute. Lack of cooperation within the EU and outside of it. And of course the question of security. Now the question of security is something that is being very a sensitive question for many years already in Europe, and today it's getting, I would say, more and more escalating as we speak. So at first I would like to talk about this illegal border crossings and about the routes that are about to be closed and reopened. We can see here that there are various borders that are being illegally crossed in 2014, and the most popular borders are the ones in the central Mediterranean route through Italy, through the coasts of Italy, or from Libya of course, and in the Western Balkans and Eastern Mediterranean as well. All the other routes are pretty much under control because, as you can see, the numbers are smaller. So in 2014, these were the numbers. When in the central Mediterranean border, there were more than 170,000 illegal immigrants, sometimes refugees, sometimes just immigrants, who came into the EU through Italy. Then in 2015 we can see a shift. The shift is mainly in the Western Mediterranean route and in the Western Balkans. As you can see, the Western Balkans that were in 2014, we can see the numbers here. 43,000, a little bit more immigrants, illegal immigrants came through the Western Balkans in 2014. And suddenly we see a very big increase in the illegal crossings. We can see more than 102,000 illegal immigrants that are crossing the border through the Western Balkans. Of course, we understand why it happened. We are talking about the refugee crisis of 2015. Summer of 2015, we're starting to talk about July and August, and etc., etc. We can also see that the central Mediterranean border is getting a little bit better in terms of the numbers of illegal immigrants that are passing through. But today, in 2017, I'm not going to show you any maps because today's maps are not accurate, and I'm going to speak about it later. The numbers today are increasing again, especially through the central Mediterranean route, because this is the only route that is yet not controlled as the other routes. And, well, there are many reasons to that. We will talk about that later. Now I want to talk about alleged facts and numbers. So first of all, for immigration, every fact and every number is just an alleged fact. It's not, let's say, it's not something we can verify for sure. I'm going to tell you why. In August 2015, there was an estimate of 2 million Muslim refugees that were waiting to cross into the EU. The number of this number, 2 million, seemed like a huge number to the press, to the mass media, to the authorities inside the EU, inside the member states. Everybody was talking about this very, very big number in a raising concern. Why really? I'm talking about numbers, so let's see. In 2010 already, Pew Research Center in Washington stated that there are already 20 up to 26 millions of Muslims inside Europe. Residents of Europe, European Muslims. And I wrote here that perhaps up to 40 million, because this number between 20 and 40 million was not an official number. But we were talking about illegal immigration before 2015. And then the illegal immigration was not traced like now. So we did not know the exact number of people who crossed the borders up until 2015. Now, Pew Research Center, actually it really helped me with this job talk, because Pew Research Center had another research, and it was published a few weeks ago. And it said that if immigration stops today, they concluded, there will be an estimate of 30 million Muslims in Europe by the year of 2050. But seriously, 30 million Muslims, after they were talking about 26 million Muslims in Europe in 2010, something is just not about right. There is a problem with these numbers, and I'm going to tell you why. Part of my research is exactly about that. This is a question that everybody raises.
Can I just have a clarification?
Of course, yes.
When you say here Europe, do you mean EU? Is it partner to the EU, or is it a bit larger than
It's,
EU?
the thing is that when they speak about this 20 to 26 million, and then they're talking about the 40 million, they're talking about EU versus Europe, not including Turkey, of course. But when they speak, and not including Eastern Europe as well. They're not including these 20 millions in Russia, 20 millions of Muslims in Russia, so in Russian Federation. But when we speak about the recent research, they are talking about the EU. Again, it doesn't seem right.
It's first generation or?
No, we're talking about the whole 3 generations.
Okay.
Also, this is a very good question, because it brings me to this. We have also transparent facts and numbers that nobody seems to relate to. And there are 2 most ignored elements. The first of them is the illegal immigration prior to 2015 that I was already mentioning. And the second is new Muslim converts. Nobody is counting them, because new Muslim converts usually don't just go out and say, I just converted to Islam, in most of the cases, and officially they never say they converted to Islam. For many reasons. Islamophobia being one of them, by the way. So now we can see that it's not the end here, because there are other alternative numbers that we're talking about. There are imams, community leaders, sometimes people who are coming from abroad as community leaders. For instance, Sheikh Mohammed al-Arifi, that I'm going to quote right now. This is Sheikh Mohammed al-Arifi. He's from Saudi Arabia. He is visiting Europe at least 3 times a year, and he comes to Germany at least once a year in order to visit his congregation. He has a community that he leads. Despite of local imams that lead the same community, he is a celebrity. He is a Salafi imam who comes from Saudi Arabia. And now I would like to show you what he says. In 2012, he mentioned during a sermon in a Berlin mosque that young Muslims approached me and said, do you know how many people are converting to Islam in Germany according to authorities' Bureau of Statistics? Not according to the data given by Muslim cultural centers and mosques, implying that the data is different. Every 2 hours, someone is converting to Islam. Dear Sheikh, the authorities can only judge by those people who share information about their conversion officially. The truth is that every 30 minutes somebody is converting to Islam here. Obviously, these numbers are also wrong, but as you can see, people are playing with numbers all the time. Everybody has an agenda they want to prove with these numbers. This is one of the reasons why we cannot have any proper estimate of the real number of Muslims inside of Europe. What do we have? We have the 2 million question. And this is something that made me start researching this subject. This is something that I'm writing a book about. I'm asking myself also, if there are more than 20 million Muslims, and I'm taking the lowest number already, in Europe by the year of 2015, why the new arriving 2 millions made such an impact on European attitude towards Muslim immigrants and consequently on the EU immigration policy? Only 2 million people. Here we would have to talk a little bit about who are actually European Muslims. So first of all, you were asking before about the first generation. Second and third generations never say about themselves that they are Muslims of Europe. They always say that they are European Muslims. It is a very important notion because we need to understand that people are perceiving themselves as Europeans, not as foreigners. Even if they are perceived by European authorities as foreigners sometimes, they perceive themselves as Europeans in most of the times, but also as Muslims. And here is what brings me, this is what brings me to the notion of hybrid identities. I think in this world, in our world, everybody has a hybrid identity. We all have combined identities inside of us. Like I was born in Russia, I live in Israel, I'm a Jewish girl, etc. So here we have also hybrid identities, ethnicity, citizenship, religion. It's only 3 components, 3 elements out of many more elements that every person has, especially third generation immigrants. Second also. So for example, we have French, Algerian origin Muslims and UK Pakistani Muslims. But also we have religious streams, something that some of the experts don't think to, include in the equation of identifying a person, a Muslim in Europe, because there are a lot of ideologies inside of Islam. In fact, there are no European Muslims as a whole. And there are no European Muslim communities also. We are talking about a very carefully, let's say a very complicated fabric of people that combine these communities. So first of all, we are talking about Shiites versus Sunnis in Europe. We have a small representation of Shiites as well. For instance, in Italy, in Torino, they have a center that is called Ahli Bayt, which is the Persian variable, the Persian version of saying Ahl al-Bayt in Arabic, the house of Muhammad. Ahli Bayt is an Iranian branch of Shiite Dawah. Dawah is preaching Islam, propagating Islam. So what they do in Torino is in fact that they live there as Shiites. But also, some of the activities that they have are meant to call and invite other Muslims who are not Shiites to become Shiites. And sometimes they invite non-Muslims as well. And they become Muslims without knowing that they became Shiite Muslims. This is a whole different lecture, and I'm not going to elaborate on this one, but there are a lot of centers like that throughout Europe, especially in Torino. This one is very interesting. So there are Shiites versus Sunnis. Now Sunnis, they are also divided to many branches and streams and ideological currents. For instance, we know about Salafiyah. Actually, the only current of Islam that we hear about in the media are Salafis. Because right now, the Salafis are the ones who are, I'm going to be more particular here, Salafi jihadis, which is the most radical fracture of Salafiyah. They are the ones who are involved in what in Europe they call security matters. Most of the terror attacks perpetrated in Europe are perpetrated by Salafis. In fact, I wouldn't be wrong if I would say that 90% of them are perpetrated by Salafis. Some of them are new converts, and they converted to Salafiyah. There is a reason to that. Today, the new Dawah centers, the propagating centers, are almost all of them Salafis. There are almost no other ideologies, Islamic ideologies, inside Europe that are propagating Islam to Muslims and non-Muslims. So there is a shift that happened. When did it happen? I'm going to mention later. So there is Salafiyya. Also, there is the Muslim Brotherhood, not as an organization, but as an ideology, as a stream. And they are perceived as very moderate because the Salafiyya mostly makes everything else look moderate. But the Muslim Brotherhood are in fact also fundamentalists, have a fundamentalist ideology because they are bringing back the traditions that were in the times of the Prophet Muhammad. And they have their own agenda, which is not like the Salafi agenda at all. They're mostly not involved in what is called security matters inside of Europe. Absolutely not. They are what is called political Islam. The political Islam, the branch of political Islam. But the thing is that this political Islam almost doesn't work as political Islam inside of Europe. It is combined with something different, and I'm going to show you on a case study how it works exactly. Now there is, of course, the whole majority of moderate and liberate Sunnis. The people that we are talking about constantly and saying that most of the Muslims are not fundamentalists, and most of the Muslims are not Salafis, most of the Muslims are not even Muslim Brotherhood affiliated. Most of the Muslims in Europe are in fact moderate Sunnis. Nobody hears about them. There's a reason to that. Because the bodies that represent moderate Muslims are usually being hijacked by Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations, not Salafi organizations. And this is exactly the function that the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations are taking to themselves in order to show their dominance in the European Muslim communities. And of course there are Sufis. Now Sufis are more mystical, it's more of a mystical branch of Islam, and Sufis are very known, I mean to us at least in Israel and in many other states. The thing about Sufis is that the Salafis believe that they are heretics, that they should be killed. And this is something that we saw just recently on Sinai, when a mosque of Sufis in the Sufi Tariqa was bombed and many Sufis were killed. So I want to show you a case study because I've been talking so much about all kinds of communities and all kinds of streams. I want to show you on a case study what actually happens inside one country in the European Union and inside one ideological stream in the European Union. I'm going to show you how Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations are working in France and what they are actually doing in order to influence the special, let's say, combination of elements inside the hybrid identities that I was talking about earlier. So, every Muslim Brotherhood organization, even if it's not telling the world that they are Muslim Brotherhood per se, because Muslim Brotherhood is actually an organization that was established in Egypt in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, and most of the organizations that are, today working and functioning inside Europe and in the Western world are usually not affiliating themselves with Hassan al-Banna per se. They're saying that they're different. We will talk about that later again. So we see that the Union des Organisations Islamiques de France, the Union of Islamic Organization of France, is an umbrella. It's an organization that has under it more than 200 organizations that are all Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations. And they are structuring the main Muslim Brotherhood representation in France. Why is it so important, one might ask? Because I'm going to speak about it quite a lot today. The thing is that every body, a representing body of Muslims in France that was structured since 2003 up until today in order to represent all the Muslims of France in front of the authorities in France was usually headed by someone from the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, most of the chairs were bought by the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm saying bought because they're physically buying chairs. So the UAF mission in France, as you can see here, is something that they're mentioning in their website. is to oversee the religious, cultural, educational, social, and humanitarian needs of Muslims in France in order to achieve positive integration. The words positive integration is something that every European wants to hear, because nobody wants the Muslims in Europe to be disintegrated. Everybody wants them to be a part, especially in France, where everybody is supposed to be so French, and being French is almost a religion in France. And well, here they are, in fact, talking to French people and saying we would like to have a positive integration inside of France. The organization has generally been seen as a moderate movement, as I already mentioned, and even as a valuable dialogue partner of the French government. So valuable that, as I mentioned before, Nicolas Sarkozy, when he was an Interior Minister of the Interior Affairs, he made the UIF the predominant organization in the government's Islamic Council, which was supposed to be combined from all representatives of Muslims in France. And like all Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations, they have three main bodies and three main objectives. The first one would be education. So, in France, as many of you of course know, there is no such thing as religious schools that are funded by the government. The religion and the government are separated in France, absolutely. In fact, laïcité is something that is, well, it's like the fourth principle after fraternité, égalité, liberté. So we are talking about something that is very, very basic in the French culture. And now when we see that there are a lot of Muslim private schools, well, they will always be private. I mean, there would never be governmental Muslim schools, as there will never be Christian schools funded by the government. So the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organization of UIF decided to create a whole new body of education that is called FNEM. FNEM is a national Muslim organization in France, and in fact what it does is they go to the existing private Muslim schools in Muslim communities, and they sign an agreement if the parents of the children agree, or if the directors of the school agree, the management of the school agrees. And this agreement actually gives the right to FNEM to give their own materials to the student, to teach them their own materials from their own textbooks, and etc. And for that, FNEM is funding most of the students' fees. So we have here inside of FNEM schools like Lycée Averroès. Lycée Averroès is one of the best secondary schools in France, in Lille. And this school is very known for, well, let's say it got, I think, the first prize in 2013 for the best secondary school in France among all schools. So it's a very good high school. So Lycée Averroès, as you can see, is signed by FNEM. In their library, I was in the library, of course, in their library they have books of Hassan al-Banna, they have books of every Muslim Brotherhood affiliated philosopher, including Said Qutb, by the way, who was calling to jihad upon non-Muslims. So we should understand that this school is actually a Muslim Brotherhood school, even if it's not officiating it. Another issue, which is well, one of the most important points in what France tried to do with its Muslims, was an attempt to control the imams. Because before 2009, the year 2009, most of the imams who came to congregations and communities, Muslim communities inside of France, were from abroad. Most of them were from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, from Syria and Jordan, etc. And they were sometimes not speaking even French. So we are talking about second and third generation. They're mostly not speaking Arabic at all. So the imam who is speaking to them is supposed to know the language, at least. And of course, there are problems that a Muslim in Europe encounters that a Muslim from the Middle East will never understand. For instance, minority rights, or there is a whole new section in the Islamic Sharia, in the Islamic law, that is called Fiqh al-Aqaliyat. Fiqh al-Aqaliyat is the rights of minorities, the law of minorities. This minority law is is a very new creation, and it was officiated in Europe by Yusuf Qaradawi. Perhaps you've heard about him. He's a very known sheikh. He is known especially as the sheikh, the main authority to the Muslim Brotherhood all over the world. So Qaradawi and many other sheikhs actually managed to fund ECFR, European Council for Fatwa and Research, in Dublin. And there, every Muslim who encounters a problem in terms of where do I pray, I'm giving you an example from the website, like a girl who is writing, where can I pray during lunch? I'm working in Switzerland, I'm working in Geneva, and I don't have a place to pray because people are looking at me really strange, and I don't want to draw too much attention to myself because it's against Islam. She's right, by the way. So they are trying to find solutions to problems like that. Also, there are many questions regarding marriages, regarding divorces in Europe, regarding all kinds of family law, and not only family law, questions about loyalty. Who am I supposed to be loyal to? My country or my religion? There is the question of double loyalty that is always a serious issue. Now, one of these questions is actually they always try to give a very fair answer, I must tell you. They are trying to give an answer that would satisfy on the person on one hand and the religious obligations on the other hand. I've never seen anyone saying there, Islam comes before your country. It always says we have to find a balance between both our loyalties. Now, I was talking a lot about ECFR, but the truth is that the imams are the ones who have boots on the ground, what it's called. They are on the field, and they have to help their communities to thrive and to sometimes exist in a very difficult world. So France was the first country that decided to issue their own school of imams, local imams, who would be French-born imams, who speak French and understand exactly the problems of the second generation in Europe. And this is what they did. AESH is the organization. They call it a College of Humanity Science, but in Arabic it's just called College of Islamic Studies. So Humanity Science and Islamic Studies. There's something interesting here. So AESH is actually the authority. I was talking before about three main objectives of Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations. So we had education, and we have dawah here, propaganda, preaching and propaganda. So AESH is the body, the institution that is the authority for preaching and propagating the right Islam. They provide higher education for Islamic studies, and their main purpose is to train imams for France, Britain, Germany, and all the other states in the EU. Well, we were talking about education, we were talking about propagating, and now we have to speak about the third main pillar of the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations in every country. France, Muslim Brotherhood affiliated charity, is represented by the CBSP, which is the Charitable Committee to Support Palestinian People. And it's a charity in favor of the Palestinian cause, but it's pro-Hamas. Only pro-Hamas. And why is that? Because in the Palestinian Authority, the only fraction that is absolutely directly connected to the Muslim Brotherhood is Hamas. This is the reason why they are giving all the money that they are receiving from charity benefits and venues. They are actually moving it, transferring it later on to Gaza Strip. We almost never see this money come to the West Bank, for instance, only to Gaza. So this is the charity that Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations are dealing with inside Europe. So here, I would like to wrap it up, at least about this case study, and to show you that the annual France Muslim Brotherhood Convention is held every year in Le Bourget, It's a huge hall, a venue. As you can see, many people are coming every year. This is a convention from one of the last years. And the relevant issues that they are dealing there in this convention are usually connected to the Islamic Ummah. And I'm emphasizing this because the Islamic Ummah is definitely playing a very important role in the identity of every Muslim. This is important. It doesn't matter if this Muslim is a European Muslim or a non-European Muslim. It is a part of the Muslim's identity. If it's not a part of the Muslim's identity today, sometimes what we can see now, it happens later. And if the person was not connected to this part of their identity, sometimes it erupts in a more radical way. I'm going to give you an example. The relevant issues for Muslims in France, as we can see, are the war in Syria, for instance. Why? Because the Islamic Ummah, and I'm going to quote here somebody, and then I'm going to tell you who. The Islamic Ummah is one body, whole body. If one part is bleeding, all Muslims in the world are obliged to fight the person who made it bleed. And this is a quote by Abdullah Azzam, who was the founder of Al-Qaeda and the spiritual leader of Osama bin Laden. Abdullah Azzam was also from the Muslim Brotherhood once, but then he made a very radical turn and turned to let's say, a more fundamental approach. So here we can see that relevant issues for Muslims in France, in every European country as well, would be always issues that have something to do with Muslims all over the world, in the Middle East, for instance. So Syria. Also, we can see that there is an affiliation to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt as well. This sign that is shown here, the Rab al-Adawiyya, is the sign of the Muslim Brotherhood. And as you can see here, there's the portrait of Morsi, who was the head of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt before Sisi, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, made a putsch and brought him down. And as you can see, the affiliation to Muslim Brotherhood among many Muslims in France, and by the way, not only in France, the three pillars that I was talking about before, they actually exist in every country inside the EU. It exists in the UK, in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, etc. And of course, we can see the symbols. Yes, Tariq Ramadan, exactly. The same Tariq Ramadan who is now being accused of sexual harassment and rapes. Yes. So Tariq Ramadan is actually a very known intellectual in Europe, not just as an Islamic scholar, but as a very known intellectual. We have to separate between the two. He's also the grandson of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. He is the symbol of the European, the second generation Muslim, for almost all Muslims in Europe. Why am I saying almost all Muslims in Europe? Because whenever you speak to a Muslim from France, from Switzerland, from Belgium, we can see that they relate to Tariq Ramadan as an authority, even though he is not an official imam or mufti. He does not have a religious authority to decide on things. But when he said, after the ban on hijab in schools in 2004, when he told girls, you don't have to wear hijabs if you don't want to. But there is our duty to obey to what is written in the Quran, so you can put on bandanas if you want to. And it's 2004, it's before Facebook and Twitter or social media whatsoever. Only his site was up online. Well, on the next day, hundreds of thousands of girls in France came to schools with bandanas, not in hijabs. So we can see that he had a lot of impact on European Muslims. Of course, he has written many books about Western Muslims. He was the one who taught Muslims of Europe to say that they are European Muslims. We can see it in his book, Western Muslims and the Future of Islam. Page 73, by the way. I love this book. So Tariq Ramadan was an authority and still is for many Muslims. He's also a symbol. So we can see him, of course, in the Bourget. Yes, we can also see this in Le Bourget, which is merchandise that says super Muslim and keep smiling, it's Sunnah, and Princess Amira, etc. But after Charlie Hebdo, we could also see shirts that says Je suis Mohammed and not Je suis Charlie. Why is that? Because, and I asked Muslims there, I was there, I asked Muslims there, why would you wear this and not Je suis Charlie? And they would say, because we are tired of apologizing all the time. They are mostly inside of, they're being put all the time in an impossible position where they have to say sorry for everything that is being done, let's say, in the name of Islam. This is something I would never use, but this is something that I was told by many Muslims. And this is why we saw so many demonstrations after every terror attack in Europe that says, not in my name. And a lot of Muslims came to these demonstrations and were holding banners, not in my name. But this, Je suis Mohammed, is something that is very important to understand, that Muslims do not want to feel sorry for being alive in Europe, for living in Europe, because they're Europeans, Muslim Europeans. So the main claims against UIF, do you have more time? Okay. So the main claims they have against UIF, and again, please remember, it's just one case study. We can speak about many other organizations, but I'm not going to wear you down today. That they believe in what is called tamkin and tawtin. Tamkin and tawtin in Arabic is finding a new homeland. In the Middle Ages, Muslim scholars were always saying that the Muslim law forbids Muslims from living outside of the Muslim land, of the Abad of Islam, Dar al-Islam. And then they used to call, up to the 16th, 17th century, all that was not inside the Abad of Islam, Abad of war, because this was the place where Muslims went to wage war, jihad, in order to make the Abad of war, Dar al-Harb, Dar al-Islam, Abad of Islam. But then, things have changed. And one of the people who have changed them in terms of rhetorics as well was also Tariq Ramadan, by the way, who said we're not living in the Abad of war anymore. We are living here in Europe. We were born in Europe. We are Europeans. We have all the rights that all the other Europeans have. This is why we are not going to live in a place that is called the Abad of war. Let's call it Dar al-Dawah, a place where we can make dawah, propagate Islam, first of all, for Muslims. Only then to non-Muslims. Never to coerce. Always to be polite and nice. Now, there is another name for the Western lands now. Dar al-Ahd. Ahd is a contract. A verbal, non-written contract between Muslims and non-Muslims that allows Muslims to live in non-Muslim land and to observe Islam. The freedom of religion actually allows it. And Dar al-Shahada. This is the last name that I will tell you today. Dar al-Shahada is the Abad of Shahada. Shahada is, first of all, the formula that every Muslim says and knows. La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. No, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. And why is it important? Because a place where you can be Muslim is a place where you can say the Shahada. And, Tamkin and Tawtin is something that the UIF were accused of, because in their manual, and they have a manual, they have a manifest, it said that we are coming to find our new homeland and we're going to live now in our new homeland in Europe. Tawtin is making a place a homeland. Now, the other claim would be affiliation with the Global Muslim Brotherhood, which is absolutely against everything that Europe believes in terms of authority. For instance, and David Cameron has publicly written and ordered to officiate a committee that would check the MB-affiliated organizations inside of the UK in order to understand if they are contradictory to British values, I'm quoting. And in the Commission's conclusions in December 2015, it was written that they are not compatible with British values at all, because they are anti-democracy, anti-liberal thoughts, anti-everything that we believe in as UK citizens, etc., etc. And the last claim against UIF that was made was disintegration of French Muslims, which is almost a sin in France. Disintegration. Not being French anymore. Taking these hybrid identities and emphasizing only one side instead of accepting all the sides and being just French Muslims or Muslims of France. Now what they are actually doing is that, well, I'm sorry that I don't have enough time to explain how they do so, but there is a whole method in schools and in the universities where dawah, they are called dawah agents, like imams who are coming to schools and to universities and speak to Muslim students and explain to them why they're first Muslims and only then French. And it happens in almost every country in Europe right now. So the Muslim Brotherhood in France, in summary, they own most of the representative institutions for Muslims. They support integration without losing Muslim identity. This is from Tariq Ramadan's side, but we already spoke about the other side. And they promote Muslim Brotherhood values, which are Sharia, first of all, education, zakat, affiliation to one Islamic ummah, etc. And now I would like to summarize my topic, my theme. What does all of this have to do with what I've started with? Does it have any connection at all? We were talking about these 2 million people, new refugees who are coming to the EU and are influencing the policy of migration and changing it. So why does it happen and why does it have everything to do with the existing Muslims inside Europe? First of all, I already talked to you about laicite versus Islamic Ummah, two loyalties. Second, radicalization versus de-radicalization. Now the question of security is a primary question in everything that has to do with migration today. Centers for de-radicalization of fighters who joined ISIS during 2014 and 2015 and 2016 and now they're coming back have been established in France twice and failed. I've been in one of those centers that was closed in December 2016 and I understand why they failed. The thing is that in these centers, the program that they have for de-radicalization of people is built without the religious component, without the religious element that has everything to do with Islam. But again, in France, they believe in laicite and in the fact that religion has a very private place inside of a person's life. Whereas in Islam, religion is a part of every aspect of your life. Political, personal, social, public life, whatever. Islam always has everything to do with it, and we cannot ignore that. The only center that is succeeding in de-radicalizing people who are coming back from jihad is a center called Quilliam in the UK. And the person who is the head of the center is Majid Nawaz. Majid Nawaz used to be a recruiter for Al-Qaeda. You've heard about him, right? So Majid Nawaz has a lot to do. He knows exactly how mujahideen think, how radicalized people think, and he does everything in order to de-radicalize them, and he succeeds. Not always, but in many of the cases. And I've seen his work, he does an extraordinary work. And France has a lot to learn from Majid Nawaz and Quilliam Center. So, as I already said, radicalization versus de-radicalization. Now, Salafi ideology is a factor of threat in Europe, and what we see is that even though the biggest concern of the EU was that the refugees who are coming into the EU will be the factor that will carry out attacks inside of the EU, this was a very wrong concern. The thing is that most of the people who carry out attacks inside the EU are second and third generation Muslims. And why it happens is actually, there is a very good reason for that. I've tried to answer this question even before, but in case I wasn't clear enough, the thing is that once you are detached from an element inside of your identity, the moment you are triggered, it's a lot easier to become more radicalized. Because you're trying to be, well, we can see it in all people who are converting to a new religion, for instance. People are trying to be holier than the Pope. This is a very important element, and it happens in most of conversions today. The same happens with people who were almost secular Muslims, second, third generation of Muslims, and now they are triggered. They are triggered by the 2 million. How they're triggered is another question that needs to be answered. But they are triggered by these 2 million who are not carrying out attacks. But they are triggering the ones who used to be, let's say, more passive, non-radical Muslims. By the way, the new immigrants are approached by Salafi and Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations in Europe because they want them. They want their voices. They want their resources. They want them as a human resource to support the same organizations that I was talking about. UIF always comes to new refugee camps and tries to recruit people to their centers. The recruitment is, by the way, a very silent recruitment. They're non-jihadic, as I already told you. They're absolutely moderate in their intentions, but they have other agendas that I've already shown. So the 2 million question, the answer is, like I said, a possible trigger for the 20 to 40 million European Muslims who might identify themselves with the newcomers instead of integrating them and integrating by themselves. Also, the changes in migration policy of the EU are intended to minimize the numbers of illegal migration into Europe. But what do they intend to do in order for that to happen? I mean, there are already many illegal immigrants inside of Europe. There is a plan inside the European Commission, and it's written, and they're going to hold a meeting about it later on December 18. There is a plan to send back those immigrants who are not supposed to be inside of Europe, who do not answer the criteria for for being refugees inside of Europe. But we will see if this plan will work. And of course, is the EU still hoping to integrate the European Muslims? Is it even possible? Because European Muslims, as I've already said, it's not something of a whole. European Muslims are very different. Most of them are individuals, don't even live inside communities. And they do have everything to do with European identities, less to do with their Muslim identities, sometimes being triggered, sometimes not. Again, a very big question of who is prone to be triggered or not, or is it even a question? Do we have the right to ask such a question? Does it have anything to do with immigration policy? Should they take it into consideration? There are a lot more questions that I could ask about the changes in migration policy. All I can tell you now that the policy is changing in these days. I mean, December 2017 is now. And the next policy changes that the EU will make in its migration policy will bring to closing more borders. Because as we could see before, I showed you maps, we saw that most of the borders are already monitored and almost closed for immigrants. And it's much harder to get into Europe. And now the question between security and the freedoms that Europe can give to people all over the world is even more relevant. And it stays open. Thank you so much. If you have questions, I will be ready to answer all of them.
Okay, please, the floor is open.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I wanted to ask, what are if you could elaborate on the ways in which the new immigration wave triggers the second and third generation Muslims to radicalize?
Absolutely. Mostly I can rely on this. It's a relatively new subject, so there's not a lot of research on that. The main resource for information would be interviews with people, primary interviews. So whenever we can see in social media or in talks in private interviews with people, and I've been interviewing quite a few in England and in France, Italy and Germany, I've seen that many people say that the trigger for them, I mean, I'm talking about people who became Salafis. They were just moderate Sunnis and they decided to become Salafis. Some of them I've interviewed twice or three times during a period of 5 to 7 years. So most of them who became more radical are saying that the trigger for them was to see the big suffering of Muslim people in Syria or in Palestine. So the wars that are happening and the fact that they belong to the Islamic Ummah is a trigger. I'm going to give you an example that was before the refugee crisis. My first time in work related in Paris was in 2002. In 2002, I came to Paris and I was looking for mosques, obviously, and I came inside and talked to people. But also I noticed that most of them interesting things, most of them are happening outside of mosques, in parks nearby, or on coffee shops nearby. So I saw that there were a lot of teenagers, Muslim teenagers, French Muslim teenagers, in a park near one of the mosques in Saint-Denis, which is one of the suburbs in Paris. So the suburb has a lot of Muslims in it, and it's a very interesting experience to be there. Sometimes it's not safe for women, but if you go with a man, it's more safe. So yes, well, I'm feminist like that. We need to face reality sometimes. So then, in Saint-Denis, there was a group of boys, and I approached them, and I started to talk to them, and then I asked them a lot of questions, and then saw that there was a man who looked like an imam because he was wearing a traditional galabiya. And then these boys told me that this imam is coming every day. Sometimes he comes every week or even less, but he comes there constantly and shows them pictures of children from Palestine who are being hurt. And then some of the boys were deciding to become more Muslim because he was telling them that they have a lot in common with these children and it's their duty as Muslims to defend these children. So this way the children were more radicalized because they were feeling obligated to defend the other Muslims who were just like them, of course, yes, the other Muslims in a whole different place. And needless to say that these children were not even Palestinian. I'm talking about something that he could show from Bosnia, from anywhere else. 2002 I'm talking about. Now later on, in 2005, I met, not the same boys, but I came to this park again, and I saw the same imam now talking to a new group of boys. And some of these boys, not me, but a proxy of mine, he was in touch with them during the years. Some of these boys joined Salafi organizations later on. So this was my first encounter with the way people are getting more radicalized by the fact that they are Muslims and they need to attend to the bleeding Islamic Ummah in another part of the world. Then I saw a different experience in terms of women radicalization. There was a girl, she was working in a hotel, and she was Algerian by descent, but she was absolutely secular Muslim. And I kept interviewing her during the years. And at first she was absolutely secular, as I said. She didn't even speak Arabic, she only spoke French and English, she was studying literature, she was absolutely laïque. Then a few years later, when we met again, she was wearing a hijab, and I said, what happened? I mean, you were absolutely secular before. And she told me that she met a person from Egypt who was a new immigrant, and they decided to get married, so she decided to be more Muslim for him. So she became more Muslim for him. And then I found out that this person from Egypt, she was actually a Salafi, and their relationship made her find more and more radical Islam. Salafi Islam, then Salafi Jihadi Islam. It's actually, I describe it in my PhD because it was based sometimes on stories like that as well, people who I've been in touch with for years. So even before the great wave of immigrants, of new refugees from 2015, we could see a correlation between the let's say the Middle Eastern pain sometimes, or the Middle Eastern radicalization sometimes, and between the radicalization of Muslims who were living in the EU. All other branches of jihadi Salafi organizations, maybe this was more of a trigger than the new refuge way for many Muslims to recruit and to become also ISIS fighters. But whenever you speak to them on social media, and we can speak to them on social media, so whenever you speak to them, they would always tell you something different. They would say that they are seeing the suffering on one hand, and on the other hand, they understand that all their life was, they were living wrong. They were not living the rightful Muslim life. They needed to become more Muslim in order to fulfill their meaning in the world. So there is a connection between the two.
I'd like to ask you more about Tariq Ramadan, who is one of my favorite figures here. I mean, in a way, he is so intriguing and fascinating, not because of the accusation of sexual harassment right now, it's because he is seen, at least also by many intellectuals, non-Muslim intellectuals, as the enlightened, Europeanized Muslim. And in fact, he writes all the right things. He will never get into trouble in his writings, but when he was asked recently, I mean, and also before, what he thinks about the stoning of women, I mean, it was Sarkozy in a television interview in France who became prepared to face him, and he asked him about that. And then suddenly this very enlightened man was not able to say, it's not good. He said, well, in that case, I would suggest to ask for a moratorium to get together the wise people in order to change from the inside. And he had redone this recently when it came to the murder of honor murderers. So this is, I think, he is very fascinating, and maybe you can tell me more about that, because his reception, in fact, in the secular world is one of fascination. He becomes a model for this European version of Islam. And once, I mean, you know, just think about Paul Berman's book, The Flight of the Intellectuals, I mean, where he is just going all over his books, what is missing in the footnotes. So I don't know how much he is, because he's definitely admired by the more liberal Muslims in Europe. What's your take on him, if you go a bit deeper?
Absolutely. First of all, it's a pleasure for me to speak about Tariq Ramadan, because my MA thesis was about Tariq Ramadan's double speak, so double talk. So this is an extraordinary example of the way double talk is being conveyed inside the Muslim Brotherhood tradition. Sometimes, in terms of security, Shiites used to hide their beliefs. It works the same inside the Muslim Brotherhood agenda. We have to hide our intentions in order to be accepted first. Okay, not because of security, but in order to be accepted. So Tariq Ramadan uses that very well. Tariq Ramadan is an extraordinary example to the way the Muslim Brotherhood is conveying their message. They are conveying this message wherever they are, and he is no different than that. But
started in the 80s.
yeah, absolutely. But it even started before. But Tariq Ramadan, being a second generation exemplary European Muslim who does not look like a Muslim, who looks, I mean, we did not talk about optics at all today. But the thing is that optics plays a big role, and optics sometimes plays the most important role in perceiving reality. And Tariq Ramadan, actually, I did mention optics when I said about the bandanas. Tariq Ramadan is the king of optics. He knows exactly what people need to hear and see, and he is using that beautifully. And now I have to admire that. Okay, so I think that what is happening to him now is I don't want to talk about the sexual harassment thing, because it doesn't have anything to do with what he is today. I mean, as a symbol. I'm not talking about his personal deeds. As a symbol, he managed to become the first European Muslim who was called by Tony Blair to be the chair of a committee that was supposed to de-radicalize Muslim youth in Britain in 2007. And after that, in 2009, the number of Muslim youth who started to join Al-Qaeda was raised by 20%. So we can see what Tariq Ramadan did. It's amazing, really. Also, by the way, Tony Blair is absolutely different now. I mean, I've met him. He has absolutely different experience now. He understands things in a different way, mostly because of that. Because of this experience with Tariq Ramadan, he started to see things differently and understanding them from a Muslim point of view as well. So what William does, they depict Tariq Ramadan. I've mentioned Quilliam, Majid Nawaz's center. Haras Rafiq, who is a friend, by the way, and we were lecturing together in the Italian parliament just 2 months ago. So Haras Rafiq has something that nobody in Europe has today. The same, well, this is what Tariq Ramadan was supposed to be. Haras Rafiq is a religious Muslim, okay, who is also a British Muslim. I met his children, all 3 of them. The thing is that he's risen to go and work for Quilliam, which is seriously a social center, and he doesn't earn a lot of money there, in his words. It was because his youngest daughter came to him when she was 13, and she told him, I don't want to be Muslim because all Muslims are terrorists. And then he was so shocked by this that he understood how she perceived herself, how they are perceived by other people inside of Britain. And then he decided to change all this. He started working with radical jihadists in order to de-radicalize them. This is something Tariq Ramadan has never done. Okay, so Haras Rafiq is the actual Tariq Ramadan. This is just an example.
Okay. More questions?
Yeah, I have one question. So, if I understood you correctly, it's mainly about the structures that are controlled by, say, anti-liberal forces. Do we see, on the one hand, that leads to radicalization, as we heard, but does it, on the other hand, also lead to basically individualization, so that basically Muslims who basically don't see their interests represented by the collective bodies of interest representation in Europe, basically withdraw from them?
Absolutely. The thing is that in terms of connection with authorities and, let's say, any interaction with authorities, especially in states like France or Italy, authorities are used to relate to communities not by their religion but by their ethnicities. And therefore they are used to connect with, let's say, communities from Algeria, from Morocco, from Iraq, from Egypt, etc. And this is why traditionally all the Muslims were represented in front of the authorities by their own imams who were of the same descent and origin as they are in their specific community. The thing is that individuals that did not want to be represented were not counted at all, because once you're not represented in front of the authority, it means you're not Muslim anymore. Seriously, this is the way the authorities were viewing Muslim communities in the 90s. Now, and the beginning of 2000s. Now things are being changed and they are different, mostly because we see people, by the way, Tariq Ramadan is such an individual. He's an individual. He says he's not represented by anyone, he's not representing anyone as well. So individuals like that we have it, absolutely. There are also people who are individuals and in political life that we see, of course. Not every Muslim has to be representative or to be represented, because as I already said, European Muslims are Europeans. Like every other European, they do not have to be represented as a whole. But the thing is that if you want to be a Muslim and to remain a Muslim family with children who will perceive themselves as Muslims, you need a community. And this community will help you to raise your children in some kind of a Muslim bubble. And then we start seeing people who used to be individuals to form communities, even if they didn't want to do so, because they want to have families and they want their children to be also part of communities. So this is something that is happening a lot, actually. So, there are, of course, cases of individuals, but we need to understand that when we speak about people with families, and Muslims mostly have families, then we are talking more about communities than about individuals. You had a question?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I want to ask you, I know that there's not a lot of similarities between the situation here, it's not an occupied zone or anything, but in the integration tendencies and trends, I know that in the last few years there's something very interesting in East Jerusalem. On the one hand side, they're getting more extreme and fundamental in Islam-wise, and on the other hand, there's a growing amount of people asking to integrate actively, asking more for Israeli ideas, more learning Hebrew, more doing the Israeli matriculum. Do you see the same tendencies there, more radicalization on the one hand, and on the other hand getting more trying to integrate, like a double process, or it's very clear that it's or radicalization or integration?
I see that the difference here would be that in Europe, specifically, I'm not talking about the US or Canada or Australia, I'm talking about Europe. In Europe, you don't have to be either that or that. You can choose whatever you want. It's really different than it's living in East Jerusalem, because it doesn't. Well, here you have a whole different understanding of what will happen to you if you're not integrate. Living in East Jerusalem is a statement by itself, or to be a part of an organization is a statement by itself. And sometimes, economically, it's better to you to be part of organization here in East Jerusalem than to be a part of, something else. But in Europe, you don't have to do all of that in order to feel safe, first of all, or in order to fulfill your potential as a person, as an individual. You can choose from all kinds of variations, and we can see, as I already said, there is no such thing as one whole Muslim community. People are choosing whatever they want, and we can see that there are a lot of tendencies going on. Quilliam, I will keep talking about Quilliam because it's a relatively new tendency, and it comes to answer, to react to the growing radicalization among European Muslims. So we see different tendencies, they are there.
But I mean, you have also European countries' reactions.
Absolutely.
I mean, the banning of headscarves or of the burqa, depending on each country, has different structures on that. I mean, there are basically two fights going on: a fight for the freedom of religion, and then the other side we have to fight for the freedom from religion.
Absolutely.
And I wonder how much among the younger generation, I mean, if you would give them the possibility not to wear the headscarf, whether they would rather take it.
There is a possibility not to wear a headscarf.
No, but if it's from the moment on more legitimate, or even, let's say, young girls saying they have to come to school without a headscarf, whether this is a good policy for them that gives them a possibility if they don't want not to put it on, because otherwise they will have to bear the fights with their own families. I mean, France is very different there from Germany.
Absolutely.
What is your take on that? I mean, how much would, let's say, the younger generation, the girls mainly, how much would they like to break out from this family community if they would be rather allowed, in that sense that they would be obliged to swim and to go without a headscarf, and saying their father, I would like to put it on, but I'm not allowed at the school.
Yeah. So it really depends on who you ask on this one. And if I would ask Ayan Hirsi Ali, I would hear something that would say that, of course, no hijab would be wear or anywhere, and we should ban all kinds of visual symbols of Islam. But we're talking about a very secular Muslim woman who is a feminist and who is fighting against religion. But then the vast majority of Muslim women in Europe are taught right now to fight for their religion, against the authorities. Mostly because their fight the legitimacy of their lives in Europe is sometimes being defined by their fight against the authorities. So this is something that we cannot just ignore and say, okay, if we will come to all the girls and we'll ban hijabs, none of them will wear hijabs at all. As you can see, I gave this example with hijabs because it's something that is very symbolic. But we can speak about halal, and we can speak about any other aspect of Muslim life. And most Muslims would say that they prefer their girls to choose by themselves whether to wear hijab or not. By the way, Tariq Ramadan's daughters, some of them wear hijab and some of them don't. All of them are getting an amazing education in Ivy League universities. So we should understand that this is something that he tells to the other Muslim girls, but doesn't mean that he says the same to his own daughters. So there is an ambiguity here. And we would have to really, literally ask every person individually, because the tendency now is to fight the authorities, not to fight the religion.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much. I have maybe a very basic question. I apologize, it's not my field at all.
You showed all the strategies and institutions of the Muslim Brotherhood and how they are controlling. Do they have a final goal? Is there one? What do they want?
Oh,
In
this
Europe,
is the
in Europe.
Yeah, I was asking the 2 million question. This is the 1 million question. The thing is that I've shown it in the summary on Tomkin and Tautin. I didn't elaborate on this one, but the main goal is to do something that Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, always wanted to do: to create a healthy Islamic society by the law of the Sharia. This is the goal.
In Europe.
Everywhere. And Europe is being just one sin among other sins. It's no different than any other place where the Muslim Brotherhood goes. But I gave this case study on the Muslim Brotherhood without mentioning other organizations. But there are Salafi organizations that have other goals, and there are moderate organizations that have absolutely different goals. But the thing is that their representatives are mainly the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is why their goal is gaining more and more supporters, because they have more power in their hands. So this goal would be the final goal, I would say, for every Muslim society, to become a healthy Islamic society by the laws of the Sharia. And this is the reason why I answered you that Muslim girls are not allowed out of this way of thinking. Many of them would like to, I believe. It's impossible now. Thank you.
Okay, Maya?
I enjoyed your lecture, but I'm a bit puzzled, and I would be glad if you could clarify a little bit my puzzle. You started from the EU level, talking about the new immigration and about the challenges that the EU is facing with the 2 millions. And then you moved to the statistics about the Muslims in Europe, which are strange to me because they're really, really small figures. And then you gave a few models for a few different member states, how they are in the EU, how they are dealing with this phenomena. But each level of governance has its own challenges, so they are quite separate challenges. The EU is dealing with the 2 million challenge, and this is not the same challenge of the third generation that the member states are dealing with. So how do you combine the two things? How do you see the influence between one on the other? That's one question. And the second question is, among the countries that you describe, which one would you say that it's sort of, if there is one at all, managed to have some sort of dialogue with the Muslim communities inside it? To have some sort of best practice to reach out to this population and try to de-radicalize the very few who are being radicalized.
Okay, so
because we're dealing with immigration
yes,
and terror,
absolutely.
and they're completely different.
Different, and this is why I'm going to make some order here. Thank you first of all. Thank you for this question, because I'm sure that I was puzzled by these figures as well. This is the reason I've brought these figures here. I do not understand how research centers can deal with any of these numbers, because they are not clear at all. We're talking about from 20 million to 40 million, and this is too much of an estimate. So on the level of the EU, they are also dealing with the same numbers, and they are also dealing with the same migrants, and they are also dealing with the same 20 to 40 million, not only with the 2 million dilemma. Because on the level of the EU, they don't have to deal only with the new waves of immigration. They have to deal, first of all, with the Muslims who are inside the EU already. It's not just the member states' problem. And as an evidence to that, I could say that there are a lot of committees inside the European Parliament that deal exactly with the integration of Muslims. Also, they deal with the question of security. That, absolutely right, is not always has anything to do with the integration of Muslims, but sometimes they do. And if I'm going to be honest, in most of their topics that are brought by the anti-terror committee, most of the topics that are brought are security, terror from within, and security inside of the EU. So I must say that the problem of the 20 or 40 million, I will stop using these numbers because they are irritating. The problem of integration or disintegration of European Muslims is a problem for the EU as well, not just for the member states, on various levels. So this is why I decided to show from the level of the EU and the policy of changes in their migration law. First of all, there were no. The immigration law was very chaotic. There was no order in the migration laws before. So this is why we're dealing with it now, because it has everything to do with the European Muslims who are already there. And I hope I answered your question on this level. And the second question, you asked about which state has a better experience in yes. So I would say it would be the UK right now because of William. And this is the only reason why it's the UK. Also, the second reason is because David Cameron, before he had to go, and really pity that he had to go, that David Cameron issued a lot of researches and allocated resources in order to find a solution. The solution to, first of all, let's say it, to liberate those individual Muslims from being represented only by the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations inside the UK, which is a very important job. Well, he didn't make it because, well, you know why, all of us do. And Brexit is a big problem now also because of that, because this process that has begun 10 years ago has stopped completely right now. And if it wasn't for William, I don't know what would happen in England or in the UK in general. So why am I saying that the UK and William are a good example? Because I know for a fact that William is now invited and is already working inside of the US that are actually studying from this good example. And France, unfortunately, did the opposite because they didn't perceive the importance of religion in a Muslim's life. Okay, so I hope this is
I think they're also bounded, by the licite. It really,
absolutely
takes away a lot of tools from France, but they did have DIRCRA.
They have what?
DIRCRA is interministerial delegate of the fight against all kinds of racism.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, they had, but they also, how can I say it? It's all very neutral. It didn't work.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it didn't work. All of the times they tried, and they tried a lot. They had many attempts since 2003 and even before. The last of them, as I said, was closed in December 2016, exactly a year ago.
Okay, I suggest now, because we have 2 more questions, I have also a question. We'll collect all the questions here and you can answer.
Then I will have to write it down because I have a horrible memory.
Okay, Yaniv, maybe.
Dina, thank you very much for the presentation. My question actually is, what's the impressions that you have got from the whole dealing with studies and everything that you about this topic? Because for one that not very know things about Europe, it can seem that all the authorities, all the government in the many countries in the EU actually postpone the dealing with the problem, and it is kind of stupidity. Stupidity is something that is very harsh or hard to deal afterwards. You said many words in Arabic, but we have another sentence in Arabic that واحد جاهل رامي بحجر بئر ألف عقل متلا معنى. It means that if one stupid man throw a stone to the well, it's very hard to pull it back. So it seems that they know the goal, the Sharia is the goal, they know everything, but they postpone deliberately the harsh decisions and everything. This is my impression. What by your impression from your stuff, all the readings and all the studies?
If I may, I can answer shortly because
Okay,
I will keep forgetting. So if you could just put this question in a question, what is exactly your question here? What do you
question
think
is
about?
what your impressions about why the government in the EU, for example, postponed
Oh, yeah.
harsh decisions.
Okay, so first of all, because it's not popular, okay? And second, and maybe this would be first, the fact that security and freedoms are clashing all the time, this is the main problem. You cannot expect European governments, and the EU of course, which is all about freedom of speech and freedoms of private freedoms and etc. You do not expect from such an institution, organization, from such states, you cannot expect from them to start deliberately hurting this freedom, no matter for what. And after meeting with many of them, many representatives, from many authorities in the member states and in the European Parliament, I can tell you that this question is being raised every day, and there is no good answer for that. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Please.
Thank you for your lecture. I think that when we speak about the relations between Muslims in Europe and European states and European institutions and so on, so we have at least two perspectives. I mean, two main perspectives, and each of them they have, the division that you described about the Muslim community, which is not community but many communities, and the same is true for the European Union, which is based on. Okay, but my question is, to your understanding, is there? I mean, we can understand. I mean, you can understand better because you deal with Europe. But as an Israeli, I can say we can understand why Europeans reject the Salafi jihadi. Of course, they do not want Salafi jihadists in their communities. Of course, they would accept in a way because there is supremacy, European supremacy, and all this heritage and whatever. But they would accept Muslims that forget that they are Muslim, that they give up their Islam and give up their tradition and give up everything. Okay, like Jews in certain period. Now the question is, when we deal with groups that are in between, like the Muslim Brotherhood, but not necessarily like the Muslim Brotherhood, because we have also wide spectrum between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafi on the one hand and those forward. So can they accept them? Are they interested in Muslims coming to Europe in order to revive Europe, or this is not part of the way Europeans think today, or in different countries do they think differently?
Again, it really depends on who you ask. If you ask Douglas Murray with his book, recent book about the strange death of Europe, he would say no. But then there are many others who would say that they accept already the Europeans, the European Muslims who are already there, because we are talking about significant percentage of population that are Muslims, and they were born in Europe. So we have to.
Can you say that Pakistanis are accepted in Britain?
What do you mean by accepted, by the way?
Exactly. So
Accepted as what? As British people? I would say that.
not officially, but as equal to other British.
Who is the mayor of London right now? A Pakistani born the British. I mean, we have. I understand your question absolutely. What you're asking is whether the Europeans would be able to forget to let Muslims forget that they are Muslims. But Muslims do not want to forget that they are Muslims.
No, some want and some do not want.
The ones who want are really in a minority right now. And moreover, I must tell you that the fact that a person is proud to be of who he is a very important part of being a European, by the way, or any Westerner at all. And being a proud Muslim, British Muslim, or a proud French Muslim is a part of their identity as well. And there is nothing wrong with it from the European point of view, unless we're talking about alt-right. We're talking about mostly about the regular Europeans, or I don't understand your question perhaps.
The regular European wants a Muslim neighbor?
They don't mind, absolutely.
They don't mind?
They don't mind because you can see it. It's not like Muslims are living in ghettos, especially in countries like the UK. You don't have to be, I mean, when you live in London, you can live near anyone. It's not, you don't have to go to the East End in order to live with Pakistanis. You are living with Pakistanis in the West End as well.
Maybe you're thinking more as a Jewish rather than European.
Don't
Jews have a problem living living next to Muslims.
Yeah, but not anymore, by the way, because in the biggest... Well, just listen. There is a huge Shiite mosque right now that was built and opened inside of the most Jewish neighborhood in London. And there is a whole issue about it right now, because at first Jews didn't want to accept it, and then the Shiite members of the community came to the Jews and talked to them, and after that there was absolutely no problem, which is something that is relatively new. And this is something that happened this year. I don't say that the problem doesn't exist. Of course it exists, but it's more on the Jewish level. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know a lot about Jewish communities in Europe. This is
Because in France, from what it was
France is different. Yes.
In Malmo and Göteborg, I mean.
In Switzerland, there was a referendum
Oh.
against the construction of a mosque.
No, wait. Let's talk about it just for a moment, okay? Just if you would.
I think it's a open discussion. So, do you have any more questions? Because I think you answered the question. So, do we have any more questions?
If I may, just in one sentence.
I also want to ask a question.
Absolutely.
And maybe my question is, maybe you can tell us not about what you told us now, but maybe tell us about your future research agenda. What are you, in 3 minutes, your future, how are you going to develop from, you have your PhD and now the book, and what would be the next stages in your development?
Well, first of all, the book is right now part of the next stage. It's a whole new step. Crescents and croissants are something about preaching Islam in Europe. The thing is that everything that I've been talking right now is actually a framework. It's a frame to the real entity, to the real content that is actually happening. And the thing is that whatever gives the biggest impact on Muslims in Europe and on Europeans who are not Muslims as well is the factor of dawah, the factor of preaching Islam, of proselytizing Islam, and telling people about Islam. Mostly it's in a positive context. What dawah means, in fact, is an invitation. And this is something that I deal with. I deal with Islamic dawah on different levels. On Salafi level on one hand, on the Sufi level on the other hand. It really is interesting for me as a researcher to see the way dawah develops and influences the European communities, and not just communities, Europe itself. I mean, I see that it has a lot of impact on Muslims and non-Muslims as well. Also, I brought something here, and from my last visit in London, I will give it to you. So, from my last visit in London, I'm studying from you, I was approached by a new dawah center in the center of London, near Strand Street. And who is Hussein, they're calling themselves. This is a new Shiite dawah center inside of London. What they do is an amazing work that is actually helping the poor, but also proselytizing Shiite Islam without telling people that it is a Shiite Islam. So they are making dawah to Sunnis and to non-Muslims in order to bring them closer to Shiite Islam. They're telling about Hussein, who is the symbol of Shiite Islam. So as you can see, dawah doesn't end. It only develops in Europe right now. And when I was in Oxford this summer, one of the most interesting experiences that I had was to meet new dawah centers inside of Oxford. They have dawah centers everywhere. Salafi, Sunni moderate dawah centers, less, but also they exist. Muslim Brotherhood dawah centers, more closed because of the organizational specifics. And of course, Shiites. I mean, dawah is the future. This is the thing. The people are not just talking to each other anymore. They're using PR, public relations, all the time. And dawah is everywhere, in social media, on the streets, etc., etc. And if you will be interested once, I will be gladly showing you a lot of new things about the way dawah works in Europe.
Dina, thank you very much. It's fascinating, and we're already out of time. But with optimistic news about the dawah, let's finish the interview. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great evening. Safe travels.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.